Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday night, but we are recording for the College Football Daily Fantasy DraftKings Friday night slate breakdown. We only have 5 games here, so instead of going position by position like I do for the main slate, where we kind of want to narrow down the options to make it sort of a 5 game slate, these are the games we have to work with. So we're going to go with it. I've got my spreadsheet up. I've got my article up as well on my Substack, so please check that out. And I'm going to get right into it, starting with the first game here. We have Southern Miss, a 16-point underdog with a 16.5-point team total, 9th on this slate out of 10 teams, facing off with Louisiana Tech, minus 16, 32.5-point team total, 3rd on the slate. So we definitely want to have some interest in Louisiana Tech here. Southern Miss is a write-off for me. I will not be playing anyone on that team. Frank Gore Jr., as you might have guessed, son of Frank Gore, the former stud NFL running back, is basically this entire team's offense, and they've only scored over 19 points just once this season. That is not good on basically any slate. The only time you play these guys is showdown. Louisiana Tech is much more interesting here. They had WVU transfer Austin Kendall at quarterback. They weren't winning many games, so they went away from him, started J.D. Head. J.D. Head got hurt. He played one full game, and he was solid, scored over 20 DraftKings points. And last week they started Aaron Allen at just $4,500, minimum price for quarterbacks, against Charlotte. Now, Charlotte has a really, really bad defense. Southern Miss better on defense, but Allen, min price, he is definitely in play here just for the minimum price option. I will probably lock him in if he is named the starter for sure. He's the minimum price. Team has the 3rd highest implied team total. It would be hard for him to really fail in this spot. And to be honest, I don't love many of the other quarterbacks on this slate, especially at their prices. So at running back, we have Marcus Williams Jr., who is the workhorse. He is, I believe, $6,500. Let me check 1 second. I have to get this slate up. But yeah, I'm going to go off the top of my head and say he is $6,500. Yes, $6,500. So I like Marcus Williams a lot in this spot. He, in a game that they project to be winning, should probably see a boatload of carries. He saw 29 last week, 131 yards, 4 touchdowns against Charlotte. He'll probably be very popular, but I think it's with good reason. These other high-priced running backs are on teams with very low totals, and it just makes a lot of sense to play Williams. Everything you know about playing home favorites pretty much applies to this play here. And, I mean, you can be aware that maybe, the 29 carries last week was an outlier. Most carries on the season by 11, first time he hit 100 yards, but this lines up as a very similar type of game where they can run him a lot. Wide receiver Smoke Harris is $5,900. He's seen 7+ targets in every game but one this season. He's posted 7 or more catches in his last 4 games with 4 touchdowns in those last 4 games. So those stats really indicate that Smoke Harris is the main guy here. He's the highest priced receiver on this team, but I think he's a little underpriced for his role in recent production. And you could have been worried maybe one of these backup quarterbacks doesn't really have a good rapport with him, but it didn't really seem to matter. They seem to be targeting him no matter what. Behind him is Trey Harris, who's only $3,500. Don't get these guys confused. There's Smoke, he's $59,000. Trey, $3,500. Trey is a good value in my view here. He ranks 2nd on the team in catches, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. He's just underpriced. He's had over 7.7 fantasy points in his last 3, so he's pretty solid value on a slate where I think you want to be paying up at running back, and you probably want to be paying up for another receiver who we'll talk about in a bit. But I also don't mind playing. I mean, this is the 3rd highest team total on the slate, so I don't mind playing Some Allen, Williams, Harris, 4-man teams. Like, the points are going to come from somewhere. Allen is minimum price. These guys are all pretty cheap relative to this team total, so you can attack other spots by really hammering on the Louisiana Tech side of this game. Arizona at Washington State. I do not have any interest in Arizona here. They are a 15-point underdog, 18.75 team total, 8th out of 10 teams on this slate. Not going to be going there myself. Washington State, minus 15, 33.75 implied team total. They're second on the slate in team total. So Washington State, second highest team total on the slate. We have to be interested. My only worry is, like, this offense, Jayden de Laura doesn't really have a ton of upside. Like, he just doesn't see a lot of volume. They like running the ball. This is not the Washington State Mike Leach offense from a few years ago that everyone remembers as going crazy in fantasy every day. That is now Mississippi State. So if you want to play that style, go play a Mississippi State slate. But here, de Laura does have 3 rushing touchdowns on the year, 2 in their last 2 games. So his recent production might be a little inflated. People might look at those game logs and think, oh, well, what a great play. This guy's been scoring a bunch of fantasy points recently. But even with those touchdowns, he hasn't been smashing. He's not my top quarterback. He's not even really in my top 3 quarterbacks, I don't think. But he's like in the mix. These other pieces are much more interesting. Max Borge, this guy was insane in the Mike Leach offense because he was getting carries, he was getting catches, he was getting a boatload of yards, touchdowns, the whole 9 yards. But now he's been splitting carries with Deion McIntosh, roughly 60-40 on the season. They've also split receptions, so it's not like one of these guys is just the receiving back. They're kind of split. Borge does have 8-2 advantage in touchdowns, though, and so that indicates to me that he kind of sees more of the goal line work. He's got 80% of the touchdowns, but only 60% of the carries. So who's coming in around the goal line? Well, it looks to be Borge. It's a good matchup, but I'm not sure either of these guys really pays off in a committee. Arizona's run defense lines up as weaker than their passing defense, which I think might be true due to personnel and scheme, but also is likely true because Arizona is terrible and just teams run the ball against them with a lead, just kind of kill the clock, win the game, move on to next week. So I do like Borge here for that reason. He could see a good amount of volume, a good amount of carries in this game. I don't think I get to McIntosh, but I do prefer Borge at this price given his touchdown share. For the wide receivers, these guys are both interesting. They see pretty good volume and pretty good yardage, have a lot of touchdown equity, despite me not having much interest in Jayden de Laura, which means that I'm playing a maximum of one of these guys in lineups unless I'm stacking de Laura, in which case I'm playing Travell Harris, $6,900, and Calvin Jackson Jr., who is $6,400. I prefer Jackson here, who has less receptions, less touchdowns, but has more yardage. So, I think he has... These guys are just very similar plays, and I don't really have too much of a preference, but this isn't a spot that I'm going crazy. Like, I'm not prioritizing these guys in my lineup. It's a weird team. Both of these guys see 8 to 10 targets most weeks. I don't think they need to see a ton of volume. Borge would probably be my top play on this team, but it's like the production is really spread out, so none of them really tends to go off for like a huge ceiling game. It's just not a spot I'm getting to a lot, and like these prices are pretty high. So I'm just not really getting to Washington State a ton here, but they're definitely interesting with the second highest team total on the slate. And but I lean Borge, the highest priority play here. Memphis, 8.5 point underdog, 26 implied team total. They are 5th on the slate in terms of team total, so coming right smack in the middle. Houston, minus 8.5, 34.5 team total. They are 1st on the slate. So this is the best game on the slate, highest total game on this slate. Memphis has quarterback Seth Hennigan, $8,200 as the leader, and he's had a few games with really high pass attempts, 50 plus. He also ran 12 times against ECU last week, so those seem like pretty good numbers. The only problem is Houston's defense, a bit underrated. They have pretty good numbers overall. Yeah, they have a pretty solid run defense. Luckily, Memphis doesn't really they don't really rely on their run game too much, especially given their defense being bad. So they're trailing a lot, playing catch up. Yeah, so I don't really have any interest in the Memphis running backs here. Houston also projects to win this game at home pretty comfortably, so Memphis has even more reason to let Hennigan air it out here. When Hennigan has had over 40 pass attempts, he's posted 30, 34, and 26 DraftKings points, and had 26 against ECU when he ran a lot more. So he's definitely in play here if he gets that sort of volume that we're looking for, and that makes us have interest in the receivers. Calvin Austin III, $7,900, is very expensive, but he has a lot of targets, 9+ in all but 2 games this year, and the exceptions came when Hennigan threw just 12 and 26 times. So the volume will be there. If Hennigan's volume is there, these guys are highly correlated. I worry a bit that he's banged up right now. He might be injured, but I think he is getting healthier and is definitely an option here and the main guy you want to play if you're playing Hennigan. You can definitely game stack this game, by the way. Like, if one of these games is going to shoot out on this slate, it's probably this one. I would bet on it being this one. I don't see Arizona putting up points. I don't see USM putting up points. I don't see UNLV or SDSU really putting up points. So, yeah, it's this game for me if I'm game stacking, for sure. So, tight end Sean Dykes, $4,400, second on the team in catches, yards, and touchdowns. He has had like 15 to 18 DraftKings points in those high-volume Hennigan games, making him a solid number 2 option here. He's a bit touchdown dependent, but if you're playing Hennigan, you're hoping for touchdowns anyway, and Dykes has a pretty high touchdown share on this team, so I really like Sean Dykes as the second option here. Javon Ivory and Eddie Lewis are 4,300 and 3,700 on this slate. Third and fourth on this offense, Ivory has performed better when Hennigan has seen more volume, so I like him as another secondary option next to Dykes, but I kind of lean Dykes in this spot. Let me pull up some of these numbers here. Yeah, I mean, I think Ivory arguably has more upside just because he's a receiver. He'll get down the field a little more. But I do prefer Dykes. I think he has a better chance of punching a touchdown for you, and on this slate, that is what you will want to see. And Dykes has actually had some pretty big games against UTSA, Arkansas State, since then, a bit more reserved in terms of his output. But some of these games were with the backup at quarterback, and that guy doesn't really have the same arm that Hennigan does. So I lean Dykes here if I'm playing a double stack with Hennigan, which I think I would, given that these secondary options are pretty cheap. For Houston, the more intriguing side of this game for me, Clayton Tune, largely mediocre this year, but he's the quarterback on the offense with the highest implied team total, and he is relatively inexpensive at $6,900. When you compare him to the other quarterback options that we're looking at, like Hennigan and Carson Strong, who we'll get to, he presents a pretty solid savings. Houston has scored 28 or more points every game since week 1, 40 or more in 6 of those games. So they have a great offense. They will score points. Memphis, bad defense. So it all lines up really well for Tune here. He'll probably need 3 or more touchdowns to be a really strong play at this price, but I think he's relatively safe. I see a hard time I have a hard time seeing him like tank your lineups. Probably be very popular on this slate as well. So that kind of does give me a little interest in the Hennigan side of this. In a tournament, you can play some leverage here. I think Tune will probably be the most or second most popular quarterback on the slate, but we will see. Memphis, also weaker through the air. So they will attack on the ground, Houston will, but they will also have a better matchup through the air, allowing Tune to see some upside. Running back for Houston, Alton Mccaskill is $7,200. He's seen 20 or more carries in his last 2 games after not hitting that mark at all this season yet. So him and Marcus Williams from Louisiana Tech, similar situations where they're seeing more volume, more production, and probably might be a little underpriced here, but are expensive compared to some of the other options on this slate. But I think they're the best pay-up options at running back, those two guys. In the SMU game, McCaskill left injured, and running back Tajon Henry came in to see 21 carries of his own. So it seems like they are running the running backs a lot here. Whoever is starting will probably see 20 or more carries, and I like McCaskill in this spot a lot. His multiple rushing touchdowns in 5 games this year, that's very solid and something you want to pay up for. Toon's main target has been Nathaniel Dell. This guy's a stud receiver. He's been targeted 8 to 11 times in his last 4 games. Big scores against SMU and USF, and those correspond with Toon's biggest production games. So much like Hennigan and Austin, we have Toon and Dell on the other side. Playing all 4 of those guys in a lineup really hurts your ability to pay up for running back. Luckily, we do have some pay down options I like on this slate in terms of receivers, but at running back, it's really hard to find options down in the lower end that you might like. Tajon Henry from Houston actually would be one of those guys that maybe you can take out McCaskill, put in Henry, hope Henry sees some goal line work maybe. He definitely has potential to score like 10 fantasy points in this spot, which isn't great, but if you're trying to pay up for a ton of upside at receiver, you're going to have to make sacrifices elsewhere. If you play Toon, you're playing Dell. Let me get back to that. ECU's wide receiver Tyler Snead just went 13 for 113 against Memphis, so Dell should have a great game here. The secondary options are also very intriguing here as value plays. Christian Trahan is worth a look, but the guy I really want to touch on is Seth Green. He's $3,700. He hadn't seen more than 1 target at all this year before seeing 9 last week, and that was in the absence of wide receiver Keyshawn Carter. So if Carter misses again tomorrow, this is something you want to keep an eye on. If Carter misses, you will definitely be wanting to play Seth Green. He has shown that he is the guy that comes in if Carter is inactive. However, if Carter is active, I like Carter a lot. Carter posted 2 very strong games in those Toon ceiling games that I mentioned before. So it would be either Toon, Dell, and Carter if Carter is active, or Toon, Dell, and Green if Carter is inactive. So keep an eye on this leading up to kickoff. We have Air Force plus 1.5, 25.5 implied team total. They are 7th on the slate. Not super interesting. At Nevada minus 1.5 with a 27-point team total. They are 4th on the slate. Air Force just runs the ball. They have the most carries in the nation, 62.7 carries per game. They lead the nation with 310.3 yards per game on the ground, but a lot of this is just due to attrition. They just keep running. Their passing offense is the inverse of this. It is non-existent. So quarterback Haaziq Daniels is basically just a running back, but he hasn't actually shown much upside for a rushing quarterback. And it's all about Brad Roberts, the running back, at 7,000, 13th in the nation, 1,000 yards already. He has the 2nd most carries in college football by just 1. And so this is the key here. In games that Air Force has led throughout or won, Roberts has seen carry counts as follows: 32, 28, 33, 29, 13, 29, 25. So if Air Force controls this game, which unfortunately I don't expect them to do, the potential for big volume is there. You might look and say, well, Nevada has a pretty good rushing defense, but they face a lot more passes than rushes because of their game scripts. Nevada, pretty good team. They lead a lot of their games. So they face less rushing. The problem, again, is that if Air Force gets behind here, it's going to be tough for them to control the clock as much as they want. And yeah, Roberts is in play for me, but you're kind of telling a story in that sense that you think Air Force is in control of this game to a pretty high degree. Nevada quarterback Carson Strong is the most expensive on the slate, $9,000. He's a pretty solid draft prospect who's been throwing like crazy lately. He has 54, 61, 49, 54, 48 pass attempts in his last 5 games. all of which were either competitive or comfortable wins. So even when they're winning, they will be throwing. The running backs on this team are not in play for me, so don't even look there. Carson Strong won't run, but the volume is huge. The raw yardage totals against Air Force on defense would tell you they have a strong defense, but it's really their run-heavy game plan that allows them to control the clock. They have the second highest time of possession in the nation, so we don't really have any matchups that are this extreme for Nevada, but they have played some pretty similarly constructed teams like San Diego State, Fresno State, and UNLV. Those teams are all top 40 in time of possession, so let's look at those and see what we can really glean from it. Strong managed 48 pass attempts in each of those games. So he also managed 26.7 to 35 DraftKings points in each of those 3 games. So are you still concerned about Carson Strong? Let me ask. Well, Utah State, they trail Nevada by over 100 pass attempts, 100 completions, 600 yards this year. But they threw all over Air Force. They threw for 450 yards, 5 touchdowns on 49 attempts. So Strong is capable of that kind of performance in this spot, despite these negative factors working against him. The issue is his receivers are all super expensive, and Nevada's team total is not super high. Like, they're not expected to score 40 points in this game, which I think they would have to if you really think Strong crushes at $9,000. Romeo Doubs is $8,000. He's seen 7 to 10 targets most games this year. I actually think he's overpriced given his typical role. He had target spikes of 13 against San Diego State and 20 against Fresno State, but that 20 is a huge outlier. They were trailing that game. The San Diego State game, Cole Turner, their second receiver on the team, was out, so it makes sense that Doubs would see more targets. I honestly don't think I'm going to pay up for Doubs on this slate. If it burns me, let it be. But this is not someone I think I'm going to be paying up for. Tight end Cole Turner, $7,400. I just talked about him missing last week's game. He is probable this week. But he actually has more touchdowns on the season than Doubs. His second in catches and yards. Turner might go overlooked by those who are locking in Doubs. It's tough to pay up for 2 of these guys. So I actually really like Turner in this matchup to come out a little bit under-owned and has the potential to have a big game here. And it would probably come at the expense of Doubs. I don't see playing these 2 guys together. Mel Kwan Stovall is $5,800. Tony Horton, $6,700. And Justin Lockhart, $4,700. These are the next 3 guys relevant at wide receiver on this team. It's crazy that we're talking about 5 wide receivers for one team, but that's how this offense is set up. Horton had a nice game against San Diego State, but as I mentioned, that was with Turner out. I think he's way overpriced for his typical role here, and I don't see him doing that again with Turner back. Stovall only hit his ceiling in a game Nevada scored 55 points, which is concerning. I think if you're paying up this high for a receiver, you want more upside there. So I like Smoke Harris from Louisiana Tech more than Stovall if you're a 1v1 at this price point. And Lockhart just hasn't been very involved in the offense lately. So I think I'll limit myself to Doubs and Turner here, leaning Turner. But these guys are both really expensive in a pretty tough matchup compared to some of them that they've seen this year. It is possible to play both of these guys with Strong, and probably, honestly, the way you would want to stack it. But I don't love the matchup. I don't love Strong. I don't love playing Strong at 9K. Yeah, it's just a really expensive team to stack. And in a spot like this, I'm just not sure I'm getting there when Houston has better value options, in my opinion. San Diego State at UNLV, this is easily the worst game on the slate. San Diego State, although I recently graduated from there, minus 10.5, 25.75 team total, 6th on the slate, yuck. UNLV, plus 10.5, 15.25 implied team total, 10th on the slate, dead last, also big yuck. This is a 41 point total game. This would be low even by NFL standards. Okay, so this game sucks. San Diego State has major quarterback issues. Brookshire completed less than 50% of his passes in 3 or 4 starts, was benched for Lucas Johnson, who is completing more passes but still not really doing anything. This offense hasn't scored over 23 points since week 6, and I believe only has one loss in that time. Like, this is crazy. It's all on the running back, Greg Bell, who has scored 20 or more DraftKings points when San Diego State scored 28 points in weeks 1, 2, 3, and 6. Earlier in the year, when this offense was clicking a little better, it was Bell that was doing most of the work. Apparently, he's been injured kind of on and off in the last few games. I think he has a pretty solid potential to score 20 DraftKings points in this spot at just $6,100. So he makes for a nice third running back, in my view, behind McCaskill and Williams, and also presents a little bit of savings if you want to come down off of those two guys. If you really need the extra money, you can go to Bell in this matchup. They're projected to win pretty comfortably, and will be running Bell. The only issue here is that the other Bell on this backfield, Chance Bell, is $3,700. He will see goal line work. Greg Bell has outcarried him 178 to 52, but Greg Bell only has a 3-touchdown lead on him, so Chance Bell will come in and around the goal line to steal some touchdowns. So that kind of should hold Greg's ceiling back, in my view. UNLV actually has been pretty solid against some really stud running backs this year. They've only given up 100 yards to one running back on this season, and that was Breece Hall, who went for 21, 102, 2 touchdowns. So I actually don't. That's the thing, is like there's a lot more arguments to not playing Bell, in my view. The offensive struggles as a whole being another one. There's a lot more arguments against Bell in this matchup than I think people will give him credit for. And I much prefer McCaskill and Marcus Williams from the two teams talked about earlier, Houston and Louisiana Tech. As for UNLV, hard pass against this defense. This defense is really good. San Diego State has held 8 of 10 opponents under 21 points, and UNLV has offensive struggles of their own to talk about. Their only successes on the year have come through Charles Williams, who ran through Hawaii and Utah State, but those defenses aren't even close to San Diego State. San Diego State's given up just 2.76 yards per carry. That's 5th in the country. 83 yards per game on the ground. That's 3rd in the country. 4 rushing touchdowns through 10 games. That's 2nd in the country. This is a really good defense. Williams did carry 20 times for 80 yards in this matchup last year, but UNLV only posted 6 points. I can see something like that happening again. Williams is $7,500. If he was like $4K, maybe it's worth taking a shot on him, but he's the most expensive running back on the slate. I don't see any way you get to him this week. So at quarterback, my top plays, as I discussed throughout this video, but to run it down again, Carson Strong in play, Seth Hennigan in play, Jaden DeLaura behind those two guys for me, but an option. Clayton Tune, probably my favorite price-considered quarterback play on this slate. Haaziq Daniels from Air Force, not a play for me. J.D. Head, interesting if he gets the start, but if you go down to Aaron Allen at minimum price, he would be my favorite quarterback of the slate if he gets the start again. At running back, you're looking at Alton Mccaskill as a top 2 play, Marcus Williams Jr. as a top 2 play, and then behind them comes Greg Bell and Max Borge. I think Borge actually takes the 3rd spot for me over Bell, and then 4th would be Brad Roberts in a situation where you think Air Force can find success running the ball against Nevada and control some clock with him. The Memphis running backs don't interest me. The Nevada running backs don't interest me in this game, in this match, or in this slate, and then Frank Gore Jr. from Southern Miss, 6,600. That's just not a play I'm going to be at. Nathaniel Dell, most expensive receiver on this slate at 8,200, but definitely my favorite of these options. He sticks out like a sore thumb up here in terms of matchup, volume, everything just points in his direction. Romeo Doubs would be in play for me, but pretty much only if stacking with Carson Strong. The Doubs Strong stack costs a lot more than the Dell Toon stack, so I don't love that as much. Calvin Austin makes a good bring back for the Houston stacks and also makes the top stacking partner with quarterback Seth Hennigan, so I like that play. Cole Turner, I actually like a bit more than Romeo Doubs. if I'm attacking this Nevada pass game, and I think Turner can be played as a one-off because I think he's a little bit cheaper and a little bit less reliant on like massive target volume. He's more of a touchdown threat as well, so he can score a touchdown and really make up some points that he might not be getting if he doesn't see like 15 targets. Travell Harris from Washington State is an option for me as a one-off. Same with Jackson from Washington State, another one-off. Smoke Harris at 5,900 is going to be a core play for me wherever I have Aaron Allen or whoever starts for Louisiana Tech. Stovall, not going to be a big option for me. The UNLV guys I'm out on. Moving down, now we're in like the low 4K range, so it's big like stud, stars, and scrubs approach at receiver here this week for me. Sean Dykes, Javon Ivory, both options for Memphis. I lean Dykes, but see merit to playing both. I wouldn't play them together. I think Austin is the main guy, and then you get one of these guys as the secondary option in a stack. Isaiah Graham did well for Louisiana Tech in their last two games, but that's basically just because he scored a touchdown. I won't be going back there. Christian Trahan, an option for Houston, but I prefer whoever plays. If Keyshawn Carter plays for Houston, I like him best as the secondary option. And if he is out, Seth Green from Houston would come in as my top value play on this slate. Eddie Lewis from Memphis, also an option, 3,700. He will need a touchdown to be viable on this slate, but it's certainly possible. I wouldn't bank on it, but he's done it in 3 of his last 4 games, so he hasn't been seeing a lot of volume, but he could definitely get a touchdown, and if he does, you would be very interested in having him in your lineup at just $3,700. Still prefer Dykes, like I said before, but Lewis, Dykes, Ivory, you're probably only playing one of these guys if you're playing a stack with Calvin Austin. These guys also could have been benefiting, these value guys could have been benefiting from Austin having some injury troubles lately and not scoring over 17 DraftKings points in his last 4 games. So if I'm looking at Austin for a ceiling game here, that's why I'm playing him. I would definitely be looking at the first 6 weeks of the season between the Tulsa and the Nicholls State game. I would be looking at those weeks and relatedly looking at the Memphis value options and seeing like how much room there was for these other guys to score points in those first 6 games as opposed to their most recent games, where I think it's been a little harder for Austin to shine with a backup quarterback and some other injury troubles plaguing him. So that's all I have for this slate. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, subscribe, ask me any questions you have. Hit me up on Twitter at mandrews93dfs. You can at me there, send me a message, DM me with some questions, whatever you want to talk about in regards to this slate. I will be there to answer questions. So without further ado, best of luck on Friday night. Hope you win some money and can carry that over into Saturday morning slate, for which I also have a video up on my channel, and I also have a Substack article as well for each of these slates. So best of luck this weekend. Have a good one.